Hey dudes, this is Julia Montgomery, Betty Childs in Revenge of the Nerds, and you're listening to Tommy Throwback Kovac on Splat from the Past. I'm not kissing a nerd.
Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be celebrating the 40th anniversary of the 1980 comedy cult classic Caddyshack with Angie D'Annunzio himself, Peter Berkrot, my third guest from the movie. I'm having him on today to talk about all things Caddyshack, filming that classic Dalai Lama scene with Bill Murray, maybe the fight scene, the swimming pool scene, boat scene, everything classic about Caddyshack, and talk about how he got to play that role and how that was his only acting role for many, many years. And now he's gotten back into the game, and he's directed some shorts, and he made a documentary about cancer. Going to ask him about all that stuff, and it's going to be fucking awesome. So, here is my interview with Peter Berkrot. Hey, Peter, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tommy. Well, thanks for having me.
My pleasure, sir. This is such a great honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
Well, it's an honor to say it's an honor. Most people only get excited who already know me.
Yeah.
Gives them something to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. So, going back in time, did you gravitate toward acting early on in your childhood?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you want to go way back, to post-womb days,
yeah.
I was never really a sports kid. I was always it was all make-believe. This was like, I grew up in the 60s, so
yeah.
Our toys were made of metal, when I was a boy. So my whole thing was make-believe, playing role-playing stuff, before, when role-playing meant you're running down the street, and saying pow, pow, pow.
Yeah.
I was always, I even made up a game called Phil, named after my favorite counselor, about a guy who died at the end of every game and came back as someone else. Because I always thought dying at the end of a game was cool. I was always the one who knocked someone down to save their life and then laid there and said, oh, go on without me. So, yeah, I would have to say, I was always into acting. And I actually started, I got my real first taste when I was probably about maybe 10 or 11. In New York, someone took me to a show at City Center, which was a huge theater in the round performance, which turned out to be at the end of the first act, they brought all the kids up, and we all did improv with them. And I think I did a Cockney accent, and everybody thought I was English. So that was like the first time I got positive feedback for something I did without planning in advance. So it started then. And by the time I was 13, I was taking acting classes in New York. So, yeah, it goes back to way back.
Wow. That game, Phil, that should be like a CGI blockbuster movie today.
So funny. Yeah, it was me and these two girls. We were up at camp, and it was Ellen and Gail Goldstein, and I was always Phil. And I would make up the whole thing, and then I would die, and then we'd get together again a few days later, and it was a little confusing because my name was only Phil the first time. Mm-hmm. But, it was good. It was good stuff. And it was, I was into Time Tunnel and Batman, I was watching TV in the 60s, so It was always based on, that stuff. When we did Cowboys and Indians, I was always an Indian, and I think that's just because I was the smallest, and, we were not very enlightened, But yeah, it was always pretending to be someone else.
Nice. So, when you're studying acting in New York, do you have any prominent teachers?
Prominent teachers? Well, I started when I was about, like I said, I was in 1973. I was probably about 13, 14, 15. When I started for about 3 years. I was at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. I don't know how prominent my teachers were. I know that I remember being very impressed because in the early part of the 20th century, everybody who was anybody studied there. There were posters of all their extremely famous, former students. But, I remember, in retrospect, it seems kind of silly. I was doing scenes in one class. They did everything. I did voice and diction and dance and all that. Mm-hmm. But the scenes that I was doing were kind of ridiculous. I remember I was 13 and I was doing George from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. They would give out these great scenes to kids who were way too young to know what the hell we were doing. So, I was pretending to be married and bitter, Mm-hmm. But prominent teachers, I don't know. When I was a little bit older, a gentleman named Richard Fancy, who was an amazing New York actor, a very respected L.A. actor who's still working. But, I didn't study with, any of the, Viola Spolin or any of the well-known Michael Esper, any of those names. But I studied at Ensemble Studio Theater in the 80s, and as far as I was concerned, everybody there was phenomenal because they were all working actors. And that's how the theaters really, and still probably to some extent, made their money, was by doing classes.
Yeah, I remember Richard Fancy. He played one of George Costanza's bosses on Seinfeld.
You knew? Oh, so there you go. Yeah, Richard was great. Richard was also, fulfilled one of my personal dreams. He got to play a Vulcan on Next Generation.
Yeah.
One where Wesley gets in trouble because they're covering up a crash.
Yeah, he's got one of those great faces. He's a really good reactor.
Oh, he is. He was actually the first teacher who untaught me all the stuff that I was doing badly. Fortunately, I never had any bad teachers, and I was so gung-ho very young that I was starting to develop instincts. But, at that age, you're still making up voices for each character, and it's all very surface and, on the outside. Richard was the first teacher who made me throw all that stuff away. Mm-hmm. and focus on action and truth and all that. So that was really when my good training began.
Nice. And was there anybody in your class that went on to become successful in acting?
Maybe. I had a lot of people. I studied so much in New York in the 80s that a lot of the folks I studied with, when I was at Ensemble Studio Theater, a lot of those people went on to do great things. Evan Handler and Rob Morrow and.
Oh yeah.
I went to college. I went to New Paltz. I was a theater major at New Paltz, and John Turturro was a couple of years ahead of me. So we had an incredible theater program, and just about everybody I graduated with most of the people are still in the business. Either in casting or teaching at Brooklyn Academy of Music or acting or whatever. So a lot of people came out of New Paltz.
Yeah, because when I talked to people who studied acting in New York, it was such a small world back then that I'm surprised when they give me a list of the people in their classes who went on to become hugely successful,
Yeah. Yeah, you read about the early days of, the neighborhood playhouse, when in the 30s, late 30s, early 40s, when pretty much everybody was famous after that, although I'm sure there were a few people they left out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So how does Caddyshack come into your life?
Well, how it actually occurred was, long story interminable. I was, at that point, I had already been at New Paltz for 2 years. I was a theater major. And I wound up working for a couple of years at the Berkshire Theater Festival in Stockbridge, Mass. The first year was extraordinary. I was there backstage, very impressionable, and, it was Joanne Woodward was there, and Tony Roberts, and all kinds of people. Mm-hmm. I remember babysitting for Tony's daughter and just going through his Rolodex and reading all the famous names because I was a big Woody Allen fan.
Yeah.
It was my second year there. 1979, I was working as a carpenter, and I was a horrible carpenter. I had failed woodshop. It was the only class I ever failed. But I convinced them to hire me anyway, which they did. It worked out well for them because they didn't pay me. I went up and kind of volunteered, but I was a staff member. This was the days when I would pretty much do anything to do the thing. You know, I could have stayed at school and done summer theater, but I wanted to, and the summer theater at New Paltz was phenomenal, but I wanted to do what I'd always heard about, which is to go do summer stock and meet the famous people and be in their presence and learn from them. So for 2 years I worked backstage and did all this stuff. And my second year there, while I was working as a carpenter, I befriended Tom Hulse. Tom was a great guy. I haven't seen him in decades now, but he was at that point just coming off of Animal House. Mm-hmm. And he approached me and said, "Are you interested in auditioning for a film?" And I said, "Oh, yes, of course." And he had just come off Animal House in 78. It was the summer before. And they knew that he was doing summer stock and that he was going to be surrounded by a lot of kids. And I don't know who it was who told him, Harold Ramis or Doug or whoever, said, "If you come across anybody who you think would fit in," and Animal House was an extraordinary party. You know, if you've seen or talked to anybody from that, it was just one big, madhouse. And so I think Tom and I became pretty good friends. I used to go into his dressing room and sing parodies of songs that I was writing. Mm-hmm. And he thought that I might fit in because I was pretty rambunctious and a good sense of humor. And he got me an audition, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it'll be the whole hour, but I got called back a few weeks later. I wound up driving back to New York to meet Harold Ramis, Doug Kenny, and Brian Doyle Murray. And the callback was just me talking to them, sitting around. So at that point, they were just deciding who they wanted to work with, apparently. So that's how I got cast. And I left early at the end of the summer and went straight down to Florida instead of going to my, what would have been, I guess, my junior year at college.
Wow. So Tom Hulse played a big role in you getting cast in this movie overall.
Yeah, I mean, he got me the audition. He set it up through his manager. And I went down to New York, with his assistance and got cast. So, it was the dream come true. It was the beginning of what I thought was going to be a beautiful, magical career. And, I'll still take it. But, all of a sudden, I had just turned 20, and I was going to be in a movie with my heroes. I mean, I was a big, partier in those days. I had grown up on Saturday Night Live, and this was 1979. This was 4 years after the show started. I was also a huge fan of National Lampoon and National Lampoon Radio Hour, and I thought Doug Kenny was the most brilliant comic ever, and he probably was. And so suddenly there I was down in Florida, my first day. I remember walking out of the elevator, my very first day. I'd just gotten there, got out of the cab, went up to the business office, and as I stepped out of the elevator, there's Ted Knight. I was also a huge Mary Tyler Moore fan.
Oh, yeah.
And he walks out of the office and goes, "Have a nice hurricane, guys." And he gets on the elevator. He was going back to L.A. for the weekend, and we were about to have Hurricane Davy. So it was really being thrust into an extraordinary experience with all of my heroes, all of my entertainment heroes.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Yeah, I was going to ask you about National Lampoon. Yeah, Doug Kenny, he was just so brilliant, and I was glad that they made that movie about him a couple years ago that was on Netflix.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the one on Netflix, that was actually based on a novel that somebody I became friendly with, Josh Karp, wrote. Mm-hmm. And the thing I didn't like about the movie was the same thing I didn't like about The Shining. It was miscast, They cast Jack Nicholson as a guy who wasn't supposed to be crazy yet. And in this case, they cast, what was it? It was
Will Forte played.
Will Forte.
Yeah.
And Will Forte came across as kind of more disturbed and more insane. I mean, Doug probably had his moments, but he was one of the most gentle and generous and funny and kind human beings I ever knew. So he came across as a little bit too messed up. Like, whatever was going on with him, it was well hidden. I was, but there was another movie. They came out with something else again. Oh, no, I don't remember what it was. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I was glad to see it, too, but he was actually, he was the best. Everyone will tell you the same thing. He was one of these people who, no matter how brilliant he was so genuinely humble, and you learned that he was more than just humble. He was immensely insecure. that he really believed that other people he said to me, I did some silly cartoon once, and he said, that's more clever than anything I've ever done. And I was like, that's really nice, but even then I knew that wasn't possible, you know.
Yeah. It was like when Michael Chiklis played John Belushi in Wired, you know, that book, you know, according to everybody who knew Belushi, was so inaccurate, and it focused all on his drug problem and not about all the good stuff he did, you know. It's just everybody from Saturday Night Live and Second City that was involved with him, they all just boycotted that movie when it came out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually become friendly online with, not online, excuse me, on Facebook with Mary Louise Weller and James Doughton from Animal House.
I have too, yeah.
He was Greg Marmalade.
Yep.
And she was, what's her name?
Babs Jansen.
Girlfriend, the one who's giving him the hand job in the car.
Oh, no.
Greg, you're not even trying.
Mandy Pepperidge.
And she said on Facebook that he was one of the sweetest people she ever met.
Yeah. That's what I heard from
There's an awful lot of generosity, you know, amongst the comic geniuses of the day.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from a lot of people, you know, and it's just sad that his drug problem gets, you know, lost in the mix there. But, yeah, so I've talked to Cindy Morgan and Ann Ryerson about Caddyshack, and they said there was a lot of partying amongst the young actors in the movie.
Yeah, there was an extreme amount of partying amongst the young actors in the movie. The only one who didn't do drugs, as far as I knew, was Ted.
Of course.
Which is ironic because he died first. So go figure, kids. I guess the lesson is smoke more weed. Yeah, Ted was a health food fanatic. Ted was very funny. He came up to me one day at lunch, and I was eating. Yeah, I'm still an idiot. You know, now I'm just a middle-aged fat Jew instead of an overweight young one. I wasn't overweight. Actually, I weighed about 119 pounds during Caddyshack. I had a high metabolism, but I was sitting there with a piece of cake with whipped cream, and it was a do-it-yourself ice cream lunch or some shit. Mm-hmm. And Ted walked up and said, "You don't want to eat that." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, No, you don't want to eat that. And I said, I kind of do, Ted. And he says, "I can prove to you don't want to eat that." I said, "Go ahead." He just took his pointer finger and stuck it in the cake, and he just kept sticking it in until there was nothing left. It was just mush.
Yeah.
And then he wiped his finger off on my plate and said, "I told you didn't want to eat that." So that was Ted. But yeah, there was a lot of partying, and he didn't do any drugs. He was actually disappointed. You know, he was probably maybe 60 or so at the time.
Yeah.
And he was disappointed at the amount of the drugs, because I think his son at that time had a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that he was incredibly professional. He could do a different take every single time and still be brilliant and hilarious. Unfortunately, I think because he was the antagonist, they seem to have selected some of his least funny takes.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah, there was a ton of partying. You've seen it in all the documentaries and books.
Yeah, I've talked to people who worked with him on Too Close for Comfort, and they say that he could be just unnecessarily mean, you know, and that, you know, he was always bitter that he didn't make it as a leading man when he was young, and just all this stuff, you know. But he was brilliant, you know, and funny.
Go ahead.
And what you just mentioned about the food, you know, there's a part in the movie where Spaulding is saying, "I want a hot dog, I want a hamburger, I want chips." I guess Ted used that as fuel for his own personal beliefs when he said, "You'll get nothing and like it." You know?
Ted was actually, that's surprising to me, because he was also an absolute doll. He was absolutely the best. We went out to dinner, just the two of us, one night, and you know, people were coming up to him, "Mr. Baxter." They didn't know the difference between him and his character. Mm-hmm. So he would go along with it and pretend I was Mr. Baxter. He was Mr. Baxter, and he introduced me as his son, Scott, which I wasn't, but he was, I thought he was incredibly kind, very generous. Everybody was. I mean, there were a couple of people who weren't, but I'll only tell you if you ask me.
Yeah. Who were the ones that were unkind? I'm sure it was Chevy was one of them.
You know, it's another thing that people get backwards. Chevy was great. In fact, one of the greatest compliments I had was he came to my door once and he said something, and I responded with a joke, and he said, "You're quick." And I stood there blubbering like an idiot, you know.
Yeah.
No, he was great. We went out to dinner. He used to like to go out with, some of the, most of us were unknown. And he and Bill didn't get along. In fact, they barely saw each other. They were even, scheduled so they wouldn't be there at the same time until they decided they had to be because it was in the news that they weren't getting along.
Yeah.
But we went out to dinner with the kid who played Spaulding, Hamilton Mitchell, who's now got his own show. He's doing pretty well now. Mm-hmm. Who played Motormouth, and maybe it was Scott, who played my brother. And we had a blast. We were at some restaurant. He was a very, very talented jazz pianist. He did a lot of improv. And I remember him jumping up at a piano at this restaurant, just playing for half an hour. And people loved it. We played tennis a lot because it was a golf course, and most people played golf. But he and I played tennis a lot. He was fantastic. Everybody was nice. The only person I had a problem with at the time was Brian Murray, who was going through his own stuff.
Huh.
That's for the record book. He could be very unkind, but that was what he was going through at the time.
Yeah. Wow. I've never heard that about Brian. I've heard so many good things about him. That's wow. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it was just his own thing. I think there was a lot of alcohol and cocaine, and some people handled it better than others.
That makes sense.
I think it was just he was going through some of his own demons, and it came out in a couple of rather cruel ways. But really, it was only the last night I was there. Mm-hmm. We actually made up. Ted got me tickets to Saturday Night Live when he hosted the Christmas show in, I think it was either 79 or 80. Mm-hmm. And Brian was backstage with a big sack, like a Santa Claus sack, full of socks. And he gave me a few pairs of socks and apologized.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And water under the bridge.
And Rodney hosted Saturday Night Live that same season, too.
Rodney was great.
Yeah.
Rodney was very insecure. Rodney used to bring me and John Barman, who played Spaulding.
Yeah.
We were probably the youngest, too. We were both just 20. And I remember one day he took us up to his room to play his act for us, his new act, because he wanted to make sure it was funny. He was worried that we were just faking it when we were laughing. So he was very authentic.
Mm-hmm. So, did you ever hear that?
Which everybody was.
Yeah. Did you ever hear that story that Ted accused Rodney of taking a dump in his trailer?
I'm surprised.
Yeah.
I don't know if I did. I must have, because I narrated the book about Caddyshack that Chris Nashawati wrote, but
yeah.
I don't remember that story. I remember when he put his name on all of the chairs and then yelled at people for sitting in his chair.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that one, too, yeah. But Harold Ramis told the story in one of the documentaries that Chevy came to him and said, did you hear what Ted Knight just told me? He's like, no, what? He said that Rodney took a dump in his trailer, and Harold was like, oh, really? And then Chevy pointed to himself.
Oh, jeez. That's hilarious. Yeah, it was a time.
Yeah.
It was a time. It's funny because last year or so, Chris Nashawati wrote the book about the making of Caddyshack, which was quite a meta experience because I got hired to narrate it. I'm an audiobook narrator now, and have been for about 11 years, and I got hired to narrate that book. And there were a lot of things I learned that I didn't know, one of which was that I was actually 20 when I made the movie. I thought I was 19, and I've been telling people that for 40 years. But when I read the book, I realized I had done the math wrong. And I also had no idea that when they blew up the golf course that the owners didn't know about it.
Oh, yeah.
That was a real, it was real interesting when I'm there as a kid, physically 20, emotionally 12, with all of my heroes and thinking they were all like father figures and they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. But it seemed to have worked out.
Yeah, Ann told me that she had to have a stunt woman pull your swim shorts down underwater.
Oh, really? That's another thing. I thought she did it. Maybe because she couldn't breathe underwater or she was afraid to see my wiener? I don't remember. I'll have to... Probably.
I don't know. I don't think she would have thought twice about seeing your wiener. She told me she thought you were cute.
Yeah, that's... Oh, did she? Oh,
yeah.
I was. It was adorable. I was like I don't know. I was just a little brother kind of guy.
Yeah. She said you two spent a lot of time together on the set.
She was a sweetheart. She was a doll. I mean, if I had known... I mean, I didn't know that she was a Second City person. The funny thing is that Michael O'Keefe and I became friends quickly because his brother was my RA in college the year before, the 2 years before.
Oh.
Kevin. I was like, are you related to Kevin O'Keefe? He said, yeah, my brother. So he was in my dorm for 2 years,
Small world.
Small world. But, yeah, Ann was lovely. Just lovely, and she still is. She's just a flower, man. She's a gem.
She is.
Flower gem.
She's a national treasure of a lady, I have to say.
There you go.
Now, that famous scene where Bill Murray is telling you the Dalai Lama story, it's so weird and so classic at the same time. I heard originally they tried to get like this local Korean War veteran who couldn't get a line of sentence out of him or something.
Well, this was really interesting. This was interesting to me especially because, you know, I was raring to go. It never really occurred to me that because I had started acting when I was a kid, and I did lots and lots of plays, and I played the lead in all these not Broadway, I'm such a liar, camp shows, let's be honest. When I got there, I worked, the very first day was all about me, and I was jumped right in like I'd been doing it all my life. And what it was the very first day, the very first scene, and it was my character, Angie, and Ray Old Caddy. That's what it was, Ray Old Caddy in the script. And it was this guy, I didn't know he was maybe he was Korean, maybe he was a Vietnam vet. It was 79. But he was this old guy, and he's telling me the story. And the way it was I'm just sitting on the Caddyshack structure with a box of powdered donuts. And the joke was, the way it was written, what Tarell told me to do was to keep eating throughout the whole scene, but not to swallow. So we shot the scene, and what I was essentially doing was I must have eaten like 4 donuts during each scene, and I never swallowed them. So I had like 4 donuts in my mouth while he's telling the story. And it got a ton of laughs. Everybody thought it was great, and one of the assistant editor, this woman Lori, who I adored, who had an argument at some point or disagreement with the editor, Bill, wound up leaving. She showed me the dailies of that and said they loved it in L.A. They thought I was terrific, but this guy was too authentic. He was too scary. They were like, he's just like a mess. Yeah. So they came to me, 2 or 3 weeks later whenever Bill finally showed up, and apparently nobody knew exactly when he was coming. And they said, we're going to redo that scene. The guy was too, they even said he just was like too much. It wasn't funny. It was a little bit like sad. Yeah. So they said, we're going to redo it with Bill, and we're just going to be standing and doing it. I was like, well, that's awesome. I mean, I hadn't really even met him. Bill was really aloof, or could be. And so I got to the Caddyshack, and Bill was inside with Harold looking for a weapon. And I remember walking in. It was actually the only time I ever expressed my artistic dismay and made a choice that perhaps affected the film and made it the great scene it is today. Because when I walked in, he was holding one of these scythes, which might have been funny because it was, it was Death's weapon. And he's standing there holding this huge rusty blade. And I said, no way. I panicked. I reacted without thinking. I said, there's no way you're going to stick that in my neck. Yeah. And so he put it down and picked up a pitchfork. And he stuck it in my neck and said, yeah, that'll do. So that was my one contribution to film history. But that's how I found out. That was when I knew we were redoing the scene. And with Bill there, they didn't need me providing comic relief, so they 86'd the donuts and just had me stand there. And of course, Bill made up the Gunga La Gunga. I don't remember that being in the first run through at all. I think Bill threw that whole thing in about Gunga La Gunga, no Gunga La Gunga. Yeah. Which was also, classic.
Yeah.
But that's how that scene came about. It was 7 hours. It took 7 hours to shoot that scene. And sometime around after lunch when we were still doing it, and I was absolutely convinced, and so were most of the crew, that he was going to pierce my frickin' thyroid. I said, it's starting to hurt. And he looked at me and said, quit whining, Berkrot. It may have been the first thing he ever said to me that, wasn't a line. And I did. And I started whining again, unfortunately, pretty soon after that, and still haven't stopped.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I mean, you look half terrified and half like you want to laugh at Bill.
That's exactly what was going on. I mean, I had some training at that point, believe it or not. I started taking classes when I was a kid, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. Then I was a theater major at New Paltz, where I, worked with John Turturro, and it was a great theater program. And then I guess it was actually it was right after that. It was before I went into New York and had some real training with Richard and some other people. So I was still doing what I did in camp plays. I was trying to be honest by not forcing anything. I knew enough to make eye contact that even though it hadn't become a natural practice for me till later on doing theater, I knew that if I looked him in the eye and didn't try anything, whatever happened would be honest. So I kind of was doing that, and I still had a lot of habits that I didn't know about yet that I learned later in more advanced classes, one of which was I giggled when I was scared.
Yeah.
And so that's what was happening. I was really nervous, and I was trying, but I was, I'm also aware that I'm in a movie with Bill Murray and making sure that I wasn't doing anything, unnecessary. I knew enough about emoting and making faces and all that crap to keep from ruining anything, but I couldn't stop. The laughing was just absolute nervous laughter. I mean, I was punctured. I had dots on my throat for weeks.
Wow. Crazy. How was working with Cindy?
Cindy was fantastic. I didn't really work with her that much. It was really me and John, and actually, I was mostly with Ann, Scott, and
who? Peter? Who? Hello? Peter? Peter? Sorry, we lost signal there.
I thought my time was up.
No, we lost signal.
Yeah. Where'd we lose out? Right when I was trying to remember everyone's name.
Oh yeah, about working with Cindy. Yeah.
Yeah, Cindy was great. She was my next door neighbor at the. We had an adjoining door, which if things were different, I was a little bit more aggressive, and she had lower standards. Who knows where that might have gone. But I just liked her a lot as a person. She had a great sense of humor. She was fun to be with. She had a talking bird that flew around the room and landed on everyone's shoulder. Oh. But in terms of the movie itself, I really my only scenes were with Bill and the other caddies. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really work with Cindy. Didn't really work with John either, Barman. He was really, he was with the hoi polloi.
Yeah. Yeah, Cindy is great, and she's got a really sad, shocking story. I mean, her agent and John Peters were trying to force her to pose for Playboy.
I remember that whole thing, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Peters was a prick. I'm happy to say that right now.
Yeah.
I thought he was a douchebag. I didn't know anything about him when I was down there. Mm-hmm. But when Caddyshack premiered in New York, and I never got an invitation. I was like, what the hell? So I may have called Warner Brothers and didn't get an answer. I don't remember what happened, but I had balls the size of cannonballs in those days. I just basically walked into Warner Brothers in Rockefeller Plaza, wherever they were. This was 79, and I said, hey, listen, I just spoke to the office in L.A., and my invitation to the premiere never showed up. I need a ticket for the opening. And they were like, oh, sure, sorry. And they gave me a ticket. So I made that up. And then I remember I was doing well. I was crazy. I mean, I had no real notion about what the protocol was in the business. I remember walking up to 1500 or going to 1500 Broadway, which was where the theater was, maybe a week before, a couple of days before. Mm-hmm. And Barbara Clayman, who was the president of BCI, had her office on the top floor. And I went into her office. I don't know what I was thinking, but I basically went to her office, walked right past her secretary, who was on the phone, and walked right into her office and sat down and waited for her to get off the phone. And I said, "Hi, I'm Peter Berkrot. I'm in this movie, and it's downstairs, and it's tomorrow night." And she was a doll. She came, and a woman named Tess Steinkoch, who wanted to represent me, an agent, came. And I went up to them afterwards, and they said, "You are terrific," and blah, 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 blah. And John Peters walked up, and I guess he knew who Barbara Clayton was, and started schmoozing. And I said, and he was talking about the party, the after party. And I said, "John, I never got an actual invitation to the after party." And he looked at me and said, "It's not for everybody."
Oh.
And I was like, "You fucking whore." So that was my one interaction with John Peters, and, you know, that was pretty indicative of who he was, and I understand now why Doug hated him. But I went to the party anyway.
That's good. What an ass.
What, are you crazy?
Yeah.
But everybody else, as I said, I didn't know anything about that either, except when I narrated Chris's book last year, I learned all these things that I didn't know were happening at the time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And this was Harold Ramis's first directing job. Did he evolve as he went along and get better at his craft?
Well, he must have, because before he passed, he was a brilliant director.
But I mean, on that movie particularly,
I couldn't tell you. I don't know. He might have. I thought of him as a father figure. He was the most anchored. You know, everyone else was crazy, and he had a wife with him, and his daughter Violet, who was like 18 months old. And so to me, he was the father figure. He was like dad. And I just assumed that he knew everything. I knew that he wasn't setting up the shots because I was on the set every day. And the cinematographer, Steve, I feel bad. I forgot his last name for a minute. But the cinematographer, or maybe it was the first AD, Steve Warner maybe, would set the shots up. He'd say, "We need to do this here, put the camera here, blah, blah, blah." And Harold would say, "Fine." And I didn't know the protocol. It was my first movie. So I imagine that in the 9 weeks he evolved. He was super smart, but nobody who wasn't on the very inside knew that it wasn't going the way it should have all along. No, it was just a big party, and we were like the lottery winners who got invited, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, he seemed confident to me. You know, what do I know? He seemed like he knew what he was doing all the time.
Mm-hmm. Did you know who directed the first unit of the boat scene with Rodney? Was Rico Browning, who was the underwater creature from the Black Lagoon.
No kidding.
Yes, I just interviewed him a few months ago, and we talked about that scene and stuff.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, that was the 2 weeks I missed because they shot that at the end. So they sent all the caddies home. You know, I was there for 9 weeks, I think, and then they sent everybody home and shot the last 2 weeks down at Boca where they did all the boat stuff.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we were all super impressed that the priest was, you know, Henry Wilcoxon, who was Mark Antony in the 1929 Julius Caesar. He'd worked with Cecil B. DeMille in all of his films.
Yeah.
You know, I remember that Doug Kenny was and Harold thought that was the coolest thing ever.
Oh, yeah, I heard Doug Kenny was a very big movie buff from the old days, the classic movie buff.
Yeah.
And all that. Yeah. Did you see...
I remember him telling me one night, I was lucky enough, we hung out one night by ourselves, and I guess I had just gotten my SAG card, because I joined SAG during the film, and he said to me that was the thing he was most proud of, that he owned, because he played, when he did Animal House, he played Stork, and he got his SAG card. I think he was very... Because of his humility, he was always so impressed with what other people did. When other people, you know, did what they did, he was just so enamored of the art. So I know he was a big movie buff, and he thought being in SAG was an honor.
Mm-hmm. He was in awe of everybody. Did you see the second Caddyshack?
No, and I'm glad I didn't. I actually, spent about 6 months begging to be in it via mail. You know, there was no email. It was, what was still, I keep reminding you, of course, it was the 80s. And when I found out they were making it, I wrote to them and I said, hey, this is perfect. I was in the first one, and I'm available. And I never heard back from anybody, and apparently that was a good thing.
I love it. I mean, it's not the first one, but it's got some hilarious moments in it, you know. I don't think it's as bad as people say, but it's definitely not the first
one.
Well,
I just took that as scripture and said, good. They wouldn't let me be in it, so fuck them.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't have minded, you know.
Yeah, but it's not the first movie by any means, but
right.
It's got some good moments. So after the first Caddyshack, did you decide that movies weren't for you and you stopped making them for many years? Or what was...
No, I decided that I wanted to be famous, and other people decided I shouldn't make them for many years. It just happened that way. It just worked out. I quit school. Mm-hmm. I was 20. I went into New York, which I lived in Queens, so it wasn't like I got on the bus.
Yeah.
Well, I did get on the bus, but it was only a half an hour ride. And I just started... I approached my career full steam. And that's when my real training started. That's when I got, I studied Linklater, Feldenkrais. I studied, I took audition technique and all sorts of stuff. In those days, the only film or camera acting class was West Baron commercial classes, which interested me, and not at all. So I essentially did tons of theater, auditioned for lots of movies, and only came close a couple of times. I was almost, the big deal that I literally almost was cast in was Jaws 3. I auditioned for the son, Scheider's son. There were two sons.
Yeah.
And they loved me. In fact, I got called back, and I spent an entire day doing the scenes, every scene in the movie, over and over again with the director, Joe Alvis, who had been Spielberg's first AD on Jaws.
Right.
And I remember the casting director saying, I wish I knew you 3 months ago. I would have cast you in this. And, so it was kind of the highlight of everything. Mm-hmm. But they wound up casting Dennis Quaid, who had curly brown hair.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't get the part. So that was disappointing. But I wouldn't have gotten Caddyshack if they didn't cast Tony, an Italian kid. So I guess that's the way it goes. They cast instead an actor named Randolph Mantooth, who I'm glad to say didn't go on to any more fame than I did, stupid man. Anyway, yeah, so I didn't get into Jaws 3. And the only other movie that I had a really good callback for, where I met with the director several times, was a movie called Class.
Oh, yeah.
With Jacqueline Bisset and Rob Lowe and Andrew McCarthy.
Yep.
And Andrew McCarthy got the role that I thought I was going to get cast in. That was real close, too, and that would have been cool. Mm-hmm. But, every actor has a great resume of movies we didn't do. So it's a funny question. It wasn't that I chose not to. It just never worked out. I did tons of theater. That was what happened. And then I moved. I left New York in 89.
Yeah.
That's a whole other story. I met my wife in an acting class, and she wanted to leave, and so on. So, yeah, it was never a choice. It was just the way it worked out. And it was, the other thing is that one of Doug's closest friends was a really major talent agent at... It was one of the big ones. It was one of the two big ones. It wasn't William Morris, but it was the other one at the time.
Probably ITM or something.
He said he was going to represent me. He was very happy to meet me, and he said, Doug speaks very highly of you, and anything Doug wants, I'll do. And then Doug died, and then he never called me back. So, who knows? These are the things that happen.
That's sad. Yeah, but did you ever go out to L.A.?
No, that was the other thing. I really loved New York. I grew up in New York. I was born in Manhattan, grew up in Brooklyn, Queens, lived in the city. I remember I sent a tape. I had done some wonderful thing that we had done in New York where I played a 15-year-old genius who was studying at MIT. And I sent it to the president of what was then NTM, Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah.
The Mary Tyler Moore Company. And she said, I love your work. Come out to L.A. and let's meet. So I called to make an appointment, and they said, no, don't make an appointment now. When you're out here, call me, and we'll schedule an appointment. And at that point, I was kind of a mama's boy. I guess I wasn't kind of a mama's boy. I've always been a mama's boy. And I was living in New York, and I was taking classes, a bunch of different classes, and doing theater, and I loved the city, and I just didn't have the guts to take off on my own. So I never went to L.A. except to visit Doug and Harold before Caddyshack came out. And I spent a couple of days with Doug Kenny and Harold Ramis. And I remember showing them my resume, because I didn't even have a resume when I did Caddyshack. Mm-hmm. And Doug was so delighted with the fact that I had played Uncle Smellicue in Dark of the Moon. He thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Oh, you were Uncle Smellicue, you know. But yeah, nothing film-wise really ever happened again until I left New York, moved to Boston, and did a couple of things up here. But you know, it's a whole different scene.
Yeah, but you've been doing stuff since, and I see you directed a TV documentary about cancer.
Yeah, well, I started teaching acting when I got to Boston. I never lived in Boston, but I left New York in, I don't know, when Karen and I got married, she wanted to leave New York, and I wound up moving up to New Hampshire to go back to school because I'd quit school to do Caddyshack. Mm-hmm. And because I was a trained actor with, you know, a really, really good background in my audition technique and whatnot, I started getting pretty much virtually 99% of everything I auditioned for. So suddenly, you know, in New York, you do one thing, you know, and I was too ethnic for commercials. And, you know, I wasn't a voice actor and this and that, so I did mostly theater, and I auditioned for a lot of film and TV. When I got into Boston, suddenly I was doing voiceovers, I was doing commercials, I was doing pretty much everything that came along. And so one of the things that happened was somebody introduced me to a woman whose husband was dying from mesothelioma. Mm-hmm. And she spent a year doing the documentary about her and her husband, and it was heartbreaking. But she was terrible as a voice actor. She couldn't bring anything to it, you know, and I basically trained her as we went and helped her to connect to what she was saying and feeling, so that she was so wonderful when she finally did it that and for other reasons it won an Emmy. So I was, you know, got credited as the director, the dialogue director. So that was cool. You know, I've done so many different things since leaving New York, you know, because you're not pigeonholed into one thing. Mm-hmm. And then 10, 11 years ago, I started pursuing audiobooks as a career and just hit it. And I've done 460 books or so since then. I was doing pickups this morning for a book about His Majesty in the White House called Demagogue's Playbook. And when I called you, I was recording a book called Star Settlers, which is a lot more fun. It's about all of it's basically the history of space travel and exploration. So it's real fun. You know, it's a whole other career. I basically started working steadily again when I was 50.
Yeah.
Been working for the last 11 years or so, doing mostly books.
That's a lot of books. Do you ever get bored when you're reading them?
I have to tell you, I did not enjoy the Coconut Oil Miracle Volume 5 at all. Yes, there were some books that were absolutely terrible. There were some books that weren't terrible but were extremely boring, that being probably the worst. There's some books that you would think would be boring, but the writing was so infused with passion. These are some of the nonfiction books I'm talking about, that I could play Jeopardy and win now. I've probably done 200 nonfiction books about just about everything. So, you know, that's interesting. But the best part is doing novels. You're basically everybody in the movie. You play all the parts, you play the music, you play the scenery, and you've got to maintain someone's interest for 8 or 12 hours. So it's extraordinarily challenging, and it's also, I'm one of the few people I know who loves the sound of my voice and doesn't mind being trapped alone in a 4x4 room with myself. Mm-hmm. And I've also been I was reading when I was in kindergarten. So wow. I've always been a big reader. And I used to read out loud. You know, I read out loud to my son, but I also used to read out loud whenever a Harry Potter book came out. I'd go to Borders and read to the kids the night before. So it just sort of morphed into a niche, you know, and thank God, because I spent, you know, after Caddyshack, I spent 40 years the same thing I did before Caddyshack, which is essentially trying to work. Teaching. I started teaching acting when I was, probably 92. No, I wasn't 92. The year was 92. So I've been teaching acting for a long time. And I became a much better actor, obviously, as a result, because I was teaching theater and beginner stuff and, more intense moment-to-moment work. And, I coached people all the time. And so I maintained my sanity mostly by teaching when I wasn't doing, big parts in films or theater or whatever. And then I found my way into books, and it's been extremely satisfying as an art form. It's extraordinary. It's hard, but it can be immensely pleasurable, especially if you're doing a really good book. And then you're channeling. You just have to remind yourself to go slow and be the book. Be the book, Danny.
Be the book. Yeah. That's great. I'm sure during quarantine, it's voiceover work is easy to come by unless there's no production.
I feel a little guilty because my life actually has improved ever so slightly. And I'm not insensitive to that. I have lived my whole life hand to mouth. And, even with the audiobooks, I'm still, going from check to check. But I haven't changed my life a bit. I mean, I'm at home. I work at home. I record every day, except Sundays. If I have some time, I'll take a whole weekend off. But I'm usually in the booth, 6 days a week. I have been very fortunate, my wife and son and I. My son is one of my engineers, so we're all safe here in this little house in Gloucester. And, yes, I'm talking about you. My son says hi.
How you doing, kid?
I don't know. He wants to know how close we are to being done because we're going to record some more when he gets back.
We are done, Peter. I think you so much for coming on today.
I'm in a rush. I don't.
Yeah.
I guess we'll be done in a minute. It's all right. I got to relax my voice again anyway a little bit. No, I'm okay. I will. He says hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Anyway, so the reality is that not only have I not really changed my life, but a lot of studios shut down in New York and L.A., so I actually started getting more work while everybody else was becoming unemployed. So I know I'm blessed. I've always known that as a white man in America, I've had my, opportunities, but I never realized that I'm actually luckier at the moment than millions of other people, although that's probably always been the case. So, it could be worse.
It could be worse, but you're very blessed, Peter, and I'm very blessed for having you on today. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thanks for thinking of me.
Absolutely, yeah. And you have yourself a great night over there, and continue doing those books. It's your saving grace.
It's been my it's really a miracle to be, at 50 finally working, at full time as an actor and making a living at it. So keep listening.
Absolutely. All right, you have a great night.
Thanks a lot, man. You take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Peter Berkrot. Ain't he a cool dude? Wow, nice guy, and just like so many of my guests, persevering. What a great guy. Persevering and doing what he loves. You gotta love that. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Add me as a friend on Facebook. Join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.